Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Wednesday afternoon. You have successfully joined the panel discussion, and we are talking this afternoon about bridging DORA and compliance frameworks with ISO 27001 certified ISMS. I'm going to take you through the slides this afternoon and be your glamorous host and moderator. So yeah, this is me, Sophie Sayer. I am one of the sales directors here at IT Governance, currently heading up the professional services sales team. And in professional services, we specialise in PCI, Cyber Essentials, penetration testing, and GRC consultancy. So that's a little bit about me. I have worked for IT Governance for a good 15 years now in various different forms. I've worked in the publishing department, for example, so we have a whole portfolio of books and tools on the topics I've just listed below. And also I have worked in the channel team, so we do contract with some 400 MSPs worldwide, and they have their own end clients, so we act as a kind of added value bolt-on service to some of their services as well. So yeah, a real good mix of different teams here, but currently working in the professional services sales team, which leads me nicely on to this webinar. Fits quite nicely. So here we go, just a quick reminder of some of the housekeeping. So all of you will be on mute during this session. So just before we get started, a few reminders. So you're on mute. We do encourage questions because there will be a good few minutes at the end of this to go through some questions from you all. So do post your questions in the chat if you can. And if you would like a copy of the presentation slides at the end and a recording, we will get that organised for you as well, just in case you happen to miss anything or want to go back and refresh. So that's the reminders. A little bit about us at IT Governance. So we have been in business for about 20 years now. The company was founded by our CEO, Alan Calder, and we have 180 employees. Our base is in Ely, Cambridgeshire, although most of us are working remotely these days. We have more than 12,000 clients across 5 continents. We have a whole expertise of consultants, and some of which you will meet on today's webinar. And we have comprehensive ISO 27001 product and service offering. So there isn't a lot we don't do. We kind of used to pride ourselves as a one-stop shop for all cybersecurity needs, and we do exactly that. So books and software and standards is what we sell. We also do some e-learning and staff awareness pieces, some cybersecurity services, and also some privacy services too. So that's a little bit about us. Also just some facts and figures here just to go through. So our track record kind of speaks for itself. We have more than 1,300 projects, or we've done more than 1,300 projects to help people prepare and maintain their ISO 27001 compliance. We have more than 15,000 privacy and cybersecurity training course delegates, and we have a training centre in Ely as well. Our training can also be delivered remotely or in the self-paced format, which is very popular. We have issued over 7,000 Cyber Essentials certifications, a really big part of our business, particularly in channel, and we have more than 2,350 customers use our governance, risk and compliance software, which we will have a little bit of a deeper dive into in this presentation. So yeah, essentially we take pride in being your trusted partner in achieving peace of mind. Talking of peace of mind, we have a NPS score, a Net Promoter Score of 63, which is approaching world class, and we've achieved that through across all of our products and services. We achieved the NPS score by sending out surveys regularly to our customers, of which they give us some well-rounded feedback, which is always reassuring. So yeah, current NPS score is 63, and we're super proud of this because it just goes to show some of the work that is being delivered by our consultants and our sales teams alike. So I'm sure you've heard enough of my voice so far, but I am just going to introduce some of our panelists for today's session. And the first one is going to be the lovely Andrew Patterson, who is our head of GRC consultancy in Europe. So Andrew, if you can hear me, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Yes, so as Sophie says, I'm the head of GRC consultancy for ITG Europe. I think when we say I'm distinguished, it basically means I'm old. So, but I've been working in GRC and risk since the early 90s, basically almost since the internet didn't really exist in the form when I first started in IT. Within the organisation, I'm the subject matter lead on things like DORA and NIS2, which is just as annoying but slightly smaller a sibling. So it's my area of expertise, and I've been working quite closely with a lot of businesses over the last 12 months, trying to get them into shape with how they're going to deal with DORA and other regulations which are coming through. So hopefully I'll be able to impart some of my knowledge in the next hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Absolutely. We've got some nice challenging questions lined up for you. So have a sip of water. Whilst we are going through some of the introductions, I'm next going to introduce you to Alice. So Alice is one of our GRC privacy consultants, and she also can answer questions on PCI, for example. So Alice, if you can hear me, please do introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sophie. Thank you. So yes, I'm a senior consultant with IT governance now for the last about 6.5, nearly 7 years. My areas that I focus in on are data protection, information security, compliance. As Sophie mentioned, I'm also a PCI DSS qualified security assessor. I'm a trainer as well with IT Governance Europe, and I am also a lead implementer and lead auditor with Europe Privacy as well. My background has been largely compliance and data protection and consumer protection, for the last about 24 years, mainly in the financial services sector, also in advertising and educational sectors as well. And that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Alice. Lovely to hear from you. And last but by no means least is our expert on cyber comply and all things related, Gary Baxter, Customer Success Manager for our SaaS products. Hi, Gary. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Of course, good afternoon. Yes, so as Sophie's already introduced myself, I'm Gary Baxter. I've been here approximately 7, going on 8 years now, with a little bit of history before that being around technology, specifically product management, training, support around that, and that's just obviously grown into where I am at the moment. My role here is dealing predominantly with our software as a service solutions, which are heavily used by end users, but also consultants and SMEs alike, like the two that we've got on the call today. So hopefully, again, like Andrew and Alice, I should be able to put some insight into the day-to-day workings around software and how it helps organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, and I would absolutely 100% recommend Gary's demo calls. He does demos for some of our SaaS products. So if anybody wants to know more on that, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity at the end to request his demo service. Anyway, bit of a shameless plug there, Gary. But nevertheless, let's move on to our agenda for today. So just a quick look at some of the key topics that our panel will be discussing. We've got 5 areas to cover. So an overview of DORA. We're going to move into the critical role of ISO 27001, establishing a compliant and resilient ISMS. Then we're going to start exploring the synergies between ISO 27001, DORA, GDPR, and some other frameworks. Then we move on to strategies for leveraging an ISO 27001 certified ISMS to bridge diverse compliance landscapes. And then last but not least, leveraging cyber comply for efficient management of ISO 27001, GDPR, DORA, and other compliance requirements. So that's the picture for today. So we will cover that. And like I said at the top of this webinar, if you would like to ask some additional questions to the panel, then just pop them in the chat, because we'll be reviewing those as the webinar progresses. And then hopefully like I've said at the beginning, we will have a good 15-20 minutes at the end of the session to go through some of your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing the presentation now, so bear with for a second, and we're going to hopefully go to the panel. And the first question that we have goes directly to DORA expert, Andrew. So Andrew, you're first in the hot seat. So the question coming to you is, how does ISO 27001 certification empower organisations to meet DORA requirements effectively?
Okay. Yeah. Nice, easy question to start with. I think just in case people just to clarify what DORA is. So DORA is Digital Operational Resilience Act. It's a EU regulation. So being a regulation, it doesn't need to go through individual national parliaments to be signed off. It is something that everybody has to do. They have to follow all the same rules. It comes in on the 17th of January 2025, or is enforced from that date. It's actually been around for 2 years, and those are the key things. Now, one of the key things to understand with it is financial services for regulated financial organisations in the EU across the 27 countries, but it also covers the ICT supply chain. So it's not just if you're a financial entity, it's if you are a supplier in that area. So anybody who's supplying into that financial entity is covered by the requirements of DORA. And it is, I think I use the expression on a few webinars I've done, it's a beast. It's massive. It is complex. It is confusing. And at the back end of it, there are things called regulatory technical standards. So once you first of all think you've got a grip of the regulation, there's a load more documents supporting it, which, just to make it even more exciting, haven't actually been officially approved by the EU Commission. So it's a bit of a, it's still a thing that everybody's trying to actually work out, what does this actually mean. But what we do know is that basically it's coming down the road and it's significant. So with anything like this, so the regulation itself is the best part of 45,000 words long. So you look at it and you start to think about, what does it actually require organisations to do? And if you think about what it is in its core, it's asking organisations to systematically look at things around risk. Okay, there's a few other areas, but at its core, it's about management of risk within financial services and making sure that organisations are resilient to things going on in the wider world. So what is required in that? So you require a management system. At its core, 27001 is a management system. It's an ISO management system around information security. You then start looking at the things that 27001 talks about, and it talks about risk. It talks about incident management. It talks about, not in these words, operational resilience. So what are you doing about disaster recovery in some of the newer controls? It talks about ICT third-party management. Okay, and these are all the components that you need to do within DORA. So it gives you that structure, that way of approaching the implementation of DORA. So if you've got certification, so that's a certification through accredited certification. So that's from, all the big certification bodies, etc., that we're all aware of. You have to do certain things within that. So you have to have annual audits. Okay, you have to be managing your suppliers and everything. So there's a couple of things that DORA specifically asks for all organisations, is that you actually get your risk framework audited every year, and that you submit, as well as that, a supplier information, and it's quite complex what it does. So in that sense, what you've actually got with 27001 is you've got that structure to enable you to do that, and it's independently verified. So particularly what you will have is particularly if you've got a problem, but if you've certified to 27001, you'll actually be able to deal with that a lot quicker. They will also be very interested from the certification, or the what we call the competent authorities, who are the regulators, because there's 22,000 organisations which will come under DORA, and they're going to have some fun actually working out what everybody's doing. So if you've got something like certification against 27001, that puts you in a very, very strong place to be able to say we are doing the requirements. And the way 27001 works is that it's your management system, so you can design it to do what you want it to do as long as it's meeting the requirements. And fundamentally, it gives you that vehicle to move forward and show that you can comply with the requirements of DORA.
Great answer, Andrew. I love that. And you're absolutely right. 27001 does provide structure. And being in a sales role, we are talking to customers about that all day, every day. So thank you for that. Brilliant. We'll move on to the second question this afternoon, which is to the panel. I have a feeling it might be Alice's turn, but do correct me if I'm wrong. Here we go. Considering the global privacy landscape, what role does an ISO 27001 certified ISMS play in ensuring GDPR compliance? Do you want to take that one, Alice?
I will, of course, yeah. Thank you, Sophie. So I suppose anyone familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, will recognise the phrase appropriate technical and organisational measures. It's something that's mentioned quite a lot throughout the GDPR, where data controllers and data processors are required to have appropriate technical and organisational measures in place to ensure the security of personal data. However, unfortunately, the GDPR itself does not go into an awful lot of detail on what exactly these technical and organisational measures look like. Article 32 of the GDPR, which deals with security processing, that article does suggest that technical and organisational measures could include pseudonymizing personal data, encrypting personal data, and having business continuity and restoration capabilities. But really, we don't get much further guidance or specific controls that could be implemented. And that's where an ISO 27001 certified ISMS, or Information Security Management System, comes in. So 27001, it contains a number of clauses with specific requirements in relation to risk management, security awareness, performance evaluation, continual improvement, etc. But it also has a detailed list of 93 controls in its Annex A, which an organisation can implement. And adherence to these controls means an organisation can actually demonstrate that they are adhering to some of the technical and organisational measures of the GDPR. These 93 controls, they're actually split into 4 categories. One category is organizational controls, there's people controls, physical controls, and technological controls. And just focusing in on the organizational and the technological there for a minute, there's 37 organizational controls. They cover areas like information security policies, roles, responsibilities, threat intelligence, access control, information security and third-party relationships, which Andrew already touched on, the use of cloud services, business continuity management, data protection as well. Excuse me, losing the voice. And that's, just mentioning some of the controls that are in the organizational control area. There's 34 technological controls. They focus in, as you can imagine, on the security of endpoint devices, privileged access rights, data masking, data leakage prevention, logging, security of networks, secure development, secure change management, etc. So I know the control areas I've just mentioned there, they don't cover all of the technological and organizational controls that are included within the standard. I've just briefly mentioned a few here, but I do believe that the standard provides an excellent framework of controls that can be used to demonstrate your compliance with the organizational and technical requirements of the GDPR. Considering then the global privacy landscape and the GDPR, so as people are well aware, the GDPR is a European regulation. However, it does stretch beyond the reach of European member states, in that an organisation based outside of the EU may fall under the scope and the requirements of the GDPR. So to be specific, I suppose any organisation based outside of the EU that's providing goods services into the EU, or is monitoring the behaviour of individuals within the EU, falls under the scope of the GDPR and therefore is required to be compliant with the GDPR articles and also with the pseudo seventh principle of the GDPR, which is that a data controller must be able to demonstrate its compliance with the GDPR. As ISO standards are internationally recognized standards, an organisation then based outside the EU that has successfully implemented 27001 will be able to demonstrate that their organisation is meeting a considerable number of the organisational and technical measures that the GDPR looks for. In fact, you could actually take this one step further. An organisation can also implement an ISO 27701 conforming PIMS or personal information management system. This is currently an extension to the 27001 standard. However, it's soon to be a standard on its own in its own right. And this standard 27701, it contains detailed requirements, controls and guidance for meeting a considerable number of the articles of the GDPR, such as the rights of data subjects, having one of the 6 lawful bases for processing personal data, conducting privacy impact assessments, consent requirements, data transfer obligations, etc. So I suppose going back to our example of an organisation based outside of the EU but providing goods and services into the EU or monitoring the behaviour of individuals based within the EU, should such an organisation implement a 27001 ISMS and extend that certification then to include a 27701 PIMS, that organisation will be meeting a vast number of its GDPR obligations.
Thank you, Alice. That was really comprehensive, and I'm definitely sensing a bit of a running theme here. Having an ISMS or 27001 ISMS plays a key role both with GDPR and DORA. So thank you for that. Really, really, really good. The next question this afternoon that we would like to discuss is, can you discuss the benefits of integrating DORA compliance within an ISO 27001 framework? And I'm going to push this over to you, Andrew, as our kind of in-house DORA expert. Are you okay to handle this one?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Sophie. Right, so in a sense, this is extending from the earlier question. I think there's a couple of key things in there. Word compliance framework. Okay, so we need to comply with DORA. We need a framework, and as I also mentioned earlier on, is that 27001 gives you that structure. Where people, and this is quite widespread, misunderstand about 27001. They think it's a very restrictive, very specific in what it says you need to do. Actually, 27001 is incredibly pragmatic in its attitude. So the expression is, it tells you where you've got to get to, doesn't tell you how you've got to get there. So if you think about, there's some key principles within the DORA regulation, is it talks about proportionality and risk. At its heart, 27001 is a risk-based system. So you're both talking about risk. Where the integration works, and this is an expression I use when I'm delivering training, and it's an old expression, is about project management and approaching issues, is that you can only eat an elephant one mouthful at a time. You can only do so much. What 27001 and the framework and the approach does from a DORA point of view is it tells you how big the elephant is. Okay, so you know how much you've got to do, and fundamentally its approach is the same way that DORA is approaching things. So we talked about the proportionality and the risk. So everything what you should be doing. So when it talks about proportionality within DORA, it talks about, well, what sort of organisation are you? How big you are. It talks about you have to have an understanding of critical and important functions that your business provides. And in that sense, it's talking about what would be the impact within a local market or in the EU if an important or critical function that you provided was unavailable. So based on that, defines what you then do about protecting and building in the operational resilience. So it helps you do that. It gives you that structure. I think the best way I can describe it is that, so I've been working with quite a few organisations over the last 12 months. Some of them are very big, some of them financial entities, and some are in the ICT supply chain, software as a service. Others are providing, servers, cloud-based systems, etc. There's a whole wide range of it, and they're in different places. So most of the organisations I'm talking to are doing things, okay, and you find sometimes that they are doing certain things over here, but they're not too sure why they're doing them. But you go in and you work out and you go, right, yeah, you've got a lot of stuff in here, okay, and we then have to make sense of it. And one of the other things I've been doing as well as that is I go in and I do gap assessments against organisations, against the DORA requirements, and it's quite a detailed thing to do. Simply, if an organisation has got 27001 and they're certified, it takes me about half the amount of time to do my gap assessment as opposed to an organisation who isn't. Because simply I know where to go and find the information. I know they're doing certain things. I know they're doing supplier management. Now, when I look at supplier management, have they got all the information that DORA requires? Maybe not. But if they haven't, they then have a continual improvement process built into their system, which goes, right, continual improvement. We build that supplier requirements into that so we can do that. If they are be doing pen testing, is the pen testing quite matching the requirements that DORA want based on proportionality and risk? Well, might not be. So we build it into our continual improvement process that we're going to address this. So if you've got all of that going on, it then makes it far more straightforward if you do it. You then build in sort of like, if you're going to run something like 27001, you probably, and Gary will talk about this in a bit, need something like Cyber Comply to help you on that because of the complexities. So what you can get in Cyber Comply is you can get a lot of tools which link things together. One of the big things we have in there is we have our ISO 27001 toolkit with DORA guidance, okay? And there are actually very few additional documentation that you need to do for DORA, which isn't already in 27001. You just have to do more of it. You have to be specific. The best way I describe it is that if you think generally about DORA and operational resilience, if you think about incident management, business continuity and disaster recovery, and you're doing all of that, well, DORA just wants you to turn the volume up, okay? And that's so if you've got that structure already in place, 27001, you've got that ability that you go in, right, so we've got our policies and procedures based on the risk, based on the requirement, because we're now bringing the regulatory requirement in there for DORA. You've got to just sit there and go, right, do we need to improve or modify any of our policies and procedures? And you probably will do, but you're not creating vast amounts of new policies and processes and procedures which you haven't done before. You're just updating them. So it gives you that ease of implementation and the ability to understand, well, this is what I've got to do, because it is, if you look at DORA straight off, it's complicated, it's confusing, and you sit there and you go, where do I start? Well, you build that structure, and that's where 27001 in that sort of situation gives you incredible value. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Loved the elephant analogy at the head of that answer. Very good. I'm going to use that myself. Right. So moving on, the next question we have this afternoon is, facing the intricate web of ISO 27001, GDPR, DORA, NIS2 and other regulations, what practical advice would you give organisations for efficient compliance management? Now, who wants to take that one? Do you want to take that one, Alice?
Yep, I'm happy to take that.
Thank you.
No problem. Well, I suppose firstly, you need to ensure that you have a clear understanding of what you need to be compliant with. So while you've mentioned there in the question, you've mentioned 27001, the GDPR, DORA and NIS2, there's actually going to be a whole lot more that an organisation needs to be compliant with. For example, in considering just legislation alone at the moment, you have anti-bribery and anti-money laundering legislation, health and safety legislation, the new EU Data Act. There's competition legislation, privacy and electronic communications regulations, company acts, financial legislation, employment legislation, the list goes on. There's also a lot more than just legislation and regulation that needs to be considered. So an organisation does need to take into account any codes of conduct or codes of practice that an organisation within their business sector needs to meet. These are usually approved or issued by a regulator or a supervisory authority. There may also be contractual obligations imposed on an organisation as part of their business relationships with their clients or their suppliers, which adherence to would also need to be monitored. An organisation may actually be certified to more than one standard. So, for example, we've mentioned 27001, we've mentioned 27701. There could also be 9001 for quality management, 22,301 for business continuity management, 14,000 for environmental management. PCI DSS, the payment card industry data security standard for organizations that are processing, storing or transmitting payment card data, or even the new Euro privacy standard. So all of these obligations, legislation, guidance, codes, contractual obligations and standards, they all need to be taken into account. They're all part of an organization's compliance landscape or compliance universe, as I sometimes refer to it. And I would always advise organizations that the first step is to identify all of your compliance obligations, document them in a list. The second step then is actually to assign a risk level to them. Those where a breach would result in a high impact to the organization really should be assigned a high risk level. Others which would not result in a significant impact to the organization should there be a breach should be assigned a lower risk level. And then from those assigned risk levels, you can decide how often compliance with each should be monitored. So, for example, I would always recommend that high-risk obligations are monitored at least annually. Low-risk obligations could be monitored maybe once every 3 years. For example, GDPR. That should be a high-risk level, as a breach could result in a significant fine, up to £17.5 million or €20 million or 4% of annual worldwide turnover, can also subject you to considerable compensation claims. Therefore, the GDPR should be monitored on at least an annual basis. From that, then you can actually build your compliance monitoring plan. You would split out the auditing or the test of your obligations based on their assigned risk level. I suppose keep in mind as well that as part of the certifications process, there will be an annual surveillance audit conducted by the external certification body. And in advance of that external surveillance audit, you will need to have conducted your internal audit as well. And those audits should be documented within your compliance monitoring plan also. The next step then would be to identify individuals within your organisation who can independently, with zero conflict of interest, audit or test each of these obligations. If you cannot find somebody internally with enough independence to conduct that testing or auditing, then you need to consider outsourcing it, outsourcing that internal auditing to a suitably qualified organisation, such as ourselves. To ensure efficient, effective compliance management, then really adherence to the compliance monitoring plan should be a key performance indicator in itself, a KPI for the compliance department. It should be overseen by the organisation's audit committee, and progress against the plan and any recommendations from audits really should be discussed during operational risk committee meetings. I would also recommend that each year's compliance monitoring plan is reviewed and agreed upon 3 to 4 months before the year commences, and that compliance monitoring plan is shared with all business departments at the start of each year, so that they can actually plan for their resource availability during the conducting of audits or tests that are going to impact on their areas. So I hope that advice helps.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great. And I love that you touched on some of the other standards, the 14,001, the 9,001, because of course that is another area that we do offer products and services on. So thank you, Alice. That was really, really helpful. Moving on then. So next question to the panel is, with the increasing requirements of cybersecurity and data privacy, how crucial is ISO 27001 certification in maintaining a competitive edge in compliance? Who would like to take that lovely question? Yeah, over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, helps if I start talking, doesn't it? Yeah, so I'll talk about the cyber security. I sort of I get a confused expression on my face when I start talking about data privacy and everything. I think that the key thing is we have to appreciate is that we're in a sector which is maturing. Cybersecurity, information security, whatever you want to call it. And we're getting into a thing where we are talking about it's about criticality for organizations. So we're now moving into the environment where regulation is starting to happen more and more and more, and it's not going to get less. Okay, the regulation and requirements is going to go only one way. So if you think about it, what we've seen in the European Union, we've got NIS2 coming in the 17th of October, which is a directive which people have to put into their own national legislation and go through national parliaments, and most of them haven't done it yet, so they've got to get their act in gear there. And you've got DORA coming into in January, but we've also got things like AI. Okay, we've got things about e-commerce. So there's all these different things going on, and you might find that you have a not just a regulatory requirement, contractual requirement. So somebody might say that we want you to get 22301. That's the business continuity international standard. They might sit there and say, right, we want you to comply with the technical requirements of CIS 18, which is the Centre for Internet Security, and it's 18 control areas with a load of safeguards, which interestingly maps quite closely to 27001. You might have somebody sitting there going, right, we need you to start doing SOC 2. Okay, so how do you approach all of these? Do you have a completely different approach for each one, or do you have a standard approach? And 27001 is that standard approach. If you look at management systems, okay, there's this the ISO ones. It's all about this making them more effective and efficient over time. Okay, and they're designed there to make your business better. It's not about creating a bureaucracy just for the fun of it. And the whole premise again with ISO 27001 is designed around this idea of the deeming, if you've ever heard of them, plan, do, check, act. You plan something, you do it, you check how effective it is, and you act on those results. So you're constantly doing that within your 27001, your 22301, your 9001, 14001, 5001, all these different standards. Okay, and in doing that, if you are following that same process, so you have one management review, you have one way of doing your risks. Okay, you have one way of organizing your audit schedule and review schedule, all these different things going on, and giving that from a cybersecurity point of view, you have that structure. Again, I think I might have mentioned structure a few times in my today, but it's the key thing. Again, it's about where do I start? Well, you start there, and then as new things come along, and a lot of these things from cybersecurity, there's only so many ways you can actually tell someone they've got to do something about access control. But both ISO, NIST, CIS, all these different organizations will all say something slightly differently, but when you actually look at it, they're all talking about the same thing. So that's where you get that benefit. And also, is again with this ever expanding area of cybersecurity and all the threats, you have this independent certification which shows people that you're being reasonable in what you're doing. Okay, doesn't mean you won't get problems, doesn't mean you won't get an incident, but it means you probably know about it when it happens, and you'll actually have a way of dealing with it. So it gives that reassurance. So it's in an uncertain and ever-changing world in what we're working in, it gives you that stability and the ability to deal with whatever comes down the road. Because remember, as I said earlier on, it's pragmatic and it's incredibly flexible in what it tells you where to get to, not how to get there, and you base that on risk. So that's sort of from the cybersecurity point of view. I don't know, Alice, do you have any more from that subject called data protection? Any views on that one? in that area?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Well, I definitely have seen since May 2018, when GDPR came into force, that more and more organisations are requiring their service providers to be ISO 27001 certified. In fact, some organisations will not even consider a supplier to submit a tender if they're not 27001 certified. So organizations that are 27001 certified are certainly getting that bit of a competitive edge over organizations without the certification. Um, Also, I suppose with the advances in data privacy legislation, the onboarding processes for third parties is getting more and more intensive. I've assisted organisations in completing some of the onboarding questionnaires that they receive, and quite frankly, they're getting longer and longer. Now, in saying that, quite a lot of organisations are recognising the importance of the 27001 certification and are happy to reduce the number of questions asked and reduce the material requested to be submitted upon receipt of a valid 27001 certification. In addition, I suppose just to mention, a new certification was approved by the European Data Protection Board in 2022 called Privacy. And it's actually the first and still currently the only GDPR compliant certification that exists. And that Privacy certification, it comprises 4 aspects that an organisation has to demonstrate their compliance with. One is the core criteria, which is essentially the GDPR controls. 2 are complementary checks and controls. So they're controls for organizations that are processing data in specific areas, like in the areas of biometric, medical health data, audio, monitoring AI, smart cities, things like that. The third aspect is national requirements that organisations have to be able to demonstrate their compliance against their national specific requirements. And the fourth area is technical and organisational measures, checks and controls, which is a considerable list of technical and organisational controls that an organisation must demonstrate their adherence to. However, this control set can actually be replaced by a valid 27001 certification. So it is another benefit to having 27001 in place. Just while slightly off topic, I do think it's important to highlight that if you are implementing an ISMS and you're going to certify to 27001, please make sure that you're selecting an accredited certification body. The national accreditation body in each country provides a list on their website of organisations that are accredited to deliver these certifications. So do please check to ensure that the certification body you choose is accredited, or otherwise it could be money going down the drain.
Perfect. That's a really good point, Alice. And actually, just to let folks on this webinar know, we obviously don't mark our own homework here at IT Governance, and we do recommend a whole host of CVs. But one in particular is very familiar with our Cyber Comply platform, which of course Gary will brief us on shortly. But it just means that actually, because they know our Cyber Comply platform, it makes the whole auditing process a lot quicker, a lot smoother, a lot slicker. So it does reduce the time as well. But yeah, essentially, great answers from you both. Thank you so much, Alice and Andrew. And it's just important to recognise that these guys have been taking time out of their busy consultancy days to join us on this webinar and give you some really good sound advice. So yeah, thank you both very much. I am conscious that we only have about 15 minutes left, and Gary is sitting there very patiently. So I'm gonna ping the next question over to you, Gary, if that's okay. It is cyber comply related. So given your experiences, could you share with us how you've seen in assisting organisations in navigating the complexities of 27001, GDPR, DORA, and other frameworks? Are you able to answer that for me?
I can do. I also think it would be very nice to have some insight from Andrew and Alex, as they both use it. I wouldn't necessarily say on a day-to-day basis, but they do interact with it quite regularly with clients of theirs in order for kind of more of a handhold approach as opposed to the DIY. So I'll talk from a user's DIY approach. They've decided to take on Cyber Comply to assist with these, as Andrew said, complex and confusing subject matters and help them grow into other frameworks and regulations as well. So the two that I'm going to talk about, they're as of the past 12 months. They are a company called JR Ricks. Some people may be familiar with them. They're a large shipping service. They're around 150 years old in operation. And as you can imagine, with it being in the shipping industry, they are a global company and they have a lot of requirements that fall onto their shoulders, so to speak. So the gentleman that I spoke with, as much as you might find this hard to believe, given the size of the organisation, it was a one-man compliance team when we first started dealing with them. Originally, they were trying to simply tackle risk assessments on the vast number of assets, which was at the time was around 300 assets. And shameless plug here, without CyberComply, he would have required additional security officers to try and segregate that work, make it a little bit more manageable and deal with it that way around, which if you look at it from a pure cost effectiveness, it saved him around 40 to 80,000 pounds just in staff allocation alone. Now, that is obviously a big time save. It's a good cost save for organisations. But the next case I'm going to talk about is Bangor University. So just in those two examples I'm going to provide, we've got one which is shipping, so industry, and we've got one which falls on the education sector. We do also, as Andrew's dealt with and Alice has dealt with, deal with multiple sectors, fintech, we deal with the health industries, etc. But also, just going on to the Bangor University, we deal with a lovely gentleman called Stefano, nicest person in the world, but he does have a huge amount of responsibility. He needs to deal with not only just the information security management in the university itself, he also deals with the research facility as well within Bangor University, which, as Alice and Andrew have alluded to, the requirements for organisations like that to get funding, to get better exposure, they need to have these kind of core baselines, 27001, or the want or the need or the way of demonstrating they're considering GDPR, etc. So when we were dealing with Stefano, he was using CyberComply to again manage it all in one place. He was able to keep track of all his documentation that we provide, the templates, which is what Andrew spoke about a little bit earlier, and that got him through 27001. That wasn't fully DIY. That was actually with the use of some of our internal consultants. So Alice, Andrew, and some of the other guys from our side would have been assisting, kind of almost checking his work as opposed to a full handhold. So it was part DIY, part assistance from IT governance as a group. Now, going back to what I mentioned around him as a individual also running the research side of things and make sure they continuously receive the funding that they much need. The GDPR compliance was also a big issue as well. So the way CyberComply deals with this is we have a lot of inter-framework mapping and regulation mapping. So, for example, he was able to very quickly look at a very extensive list of different articles and requirements within the GDPR. And through our mapping, he's able to quickly see, it's telling me I need to implement these controls from 27001. And according to my SOA that I can see straight away in CyberComply, we're implementing them. So it gives them almost an immediate checkbox to say, yep, we are complying with that because we're implementing this from 27001. So that's my little insight for, I suppose, half of question 6. Andrew, do you have to add to that, or Alice?
Yeah, I'll just give a very quick one because I know we want to get to some questions. I think the biggest thing is now, as somebody who spent most of their career doing risk assessments on spreadsheets, and these things keep going further and further and further. Very simply, what you can get out of CyberComply is you go and do a risk assessment. It has the workflow in there, confidentiality, integrity, availability. You then can select your controls. Okay, against your controls, you can then build up a task about what you need to do with it, and then you can link a document from the document kits. And it doesn't only help you when you are doing the implementation, it helps you when you're being audited. Because one of the biggest challenges with auditing, and I know because I've been here when I've been audited, is knowing where things are, because you've got big complex systems. So if you've got a logical system where you can go through and you go, this is there, and the other thing's coming in with building in a big an audit module in there, so you can hold the evidence in, your internal audits, external, all these sort of things, supplier module, we have an incident management module in there, all these, and everything links. Okay, so if you're doing multiple systems, so you say you've got 27001, you need to do that, 22301, you say you want to do some data protection, you want to link in things like SIS-18, you want to bring in 9001, you can do it all in one central place and everything links together. And over time, that saves you huge amounts of time.
I think it's just worth mentioning as well, Andrew. Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that our product offers over other products that are similar on the market, and I know there are some, is that our CyberComply platform includes DORA, NIS2, 27000. It includes everything. So I think that's worth just mentioning because you can get it all in one place, which is kind of different to other products out there. So brilliant. Alice, would you like to just quickly touch on any of that before we move on?
Yeah, I suppose from the 27701, the privacy and the GDPR perspective, I find the gap analysis tool is super for clients that are starting out on their GDPR compliance journey. It highlights areas they need to focus on. It's also, I find, being used by clients now as part of their annual data privacy audit process as well to assess their levels of compliance. Um, the data protection impact assessment tool is actually so self-explanatory that my clients find it very easy to walk through. Before they know it, they've actually completed a GDPR or compliant DPIA. However, the application I love the most within it, and I know that I sound like such a nerd saying this, but it has to be the data flow mapping tool. To complete a data map, it's not actually part of the GDPR requirements. It's also not required under a lot of countries' national privacy laws. Some countries do have a requirement within their data protection acts, like for example, Spain, I believe is one such country. Regardless though of whether it's required or not, when you complete a data map, you understand the types of personal data you're capturing, how you're capturing, storing, and transmitting the data, who has access to it, where it's going through and outside the organization, how long it's been retained for, what measures you have in place to protect the data. And with the Cyber Comply data flow mapping tool, you also have to capture the basis for processing and the purposes, as well as other information like locations and data recipients. In fact, the data flow mapping process actually captures all the information that an organization is required to record as part of their GDPR Article 30 records of processing activities, or ROPA. And I particularly like the fact that I can click on a report button as well, and it pulls the entire data map into a report, as well as the documentary side that provides all the necessary information like the data elements, the locations, lawful basis, purposes, etc. So I do definitely use it for quite a few clients.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alice. By the way, folks, keep your questions coming in. I can see absolutely oodles coming through through on the question panel. So keep them coming. If we don't get through them all this afternoon, we'll try and get back to you individually. I am just going to share my presentation again, because I think, Gary, you want to go through some of the cyber comply elements just to kind of complete this presentation. Gary, are you happy for me to share my screen for the last few slides?
We can do. What I was going to suggest is Mihaela, as one of our moderators, has put in the chat the ability to book in a session with us and the team here. So from my side, there's only a couple of extra little points I wanted to cover off, and then if anybody wants to know more about how Cyber Comply can help them, that session books straight into our calendars, and we can get a call in as early as first thing tomorrow morning. So if it's going to hold up any of the questions, that's fine. The only things I was just going to leave it with, a little pre-prepared blurb that I wanted to finish off my section with, if that's okay, is just simply that the two topic types that Andrew and Alice have been bouncing off each other, both privacy and information security based, is that Cyber Comply isn't built just as a one-trick pony. It's not built just for information security, and it's not just built for data privacy. So that way we can actually have two teams working together as opposed to butting heads in the meeting room once a week to understand what's one team doing versus the other. We do it through a lot of shared commodities in the system. So things like an asset register that Andrew would be working on for risk assessments for 27001, Alice would be using the exact same register for data mapping and DPIAs alike. That goes a lot further into things like our document kits, which Andrew spoke about with regards to these pre-made templates, which are a 99% good fit for most organizations. In the most rudimentary way, it's essentially filling the blanks that's related to you as an organization. And we even offer suggested text to make that a little bit simpler for them as well. But again, I won't spoil the surprise. So if anybody wants to see it in more detail, please use the link and I'll be happy to jump on a call with you.
Well, folks, you've heard it from the horse's mouth. Gary's access to Gary's diary is early as tomorrow. So yeah, do let us know if you want some more information or indeed a demo of our Cyber Comply platform. Now we've just got about 5 minutes left, so I am just going to skip to a couple of the questions if that's okay with everybody. I'll start bottom up. So the first question, I'm going to pass it to you, Andrew, if you're all eyes and ears. Are there any areas of DORA that can't be covered by ISO 27001?
Right. Well, the key thing is that yes and no, because the 27001 is about the requirements of the standard and the requirement of your system. You have to take into consideration contractual, regulatory, legal requirements. You can build it into to 27. So it tells you have to do something about something, but doesn't say what you need to do because it's based on risk. If you want to go belt and braces, bring in 22301 as the business continuity, but fundamentally it gives you the vehicle to build your system to reflect the requirements of DORA. Okay, and remember that people think that 27001 is very restrictive. It's not. It's very open in how it does. Suits any size of organisation, any type of organisation, all those sort of any sector. So in one way, yes, it does, but it takes a bit of thinking about. Okay.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
that's answered that.
Great, thank you, Andrew. I'm going to shoot the next one over. Oh,
can I just ask? Because I can see the questions, and there's actually a very important question somebody's asked, and I think it's really important for to answer it. There's a question there: why should we be concerned with DORA as UK is not governed by EU law? Yeah, we're not, unless you live in Northern Ireland like I do, where it's still a bit there. Right, very good question. Think about this: is that the UK's tech sector is twice the size of France. So 3 times the size of France. Tech sector is twice the size of Germany. A lot of technical services, ICT, are delivered into the European Union from UK-based companies. Our single biggest part of our economy is financial services. One of our biggest bases for those financial services is the European Union. So I'm working with UK entities who have had to have set up a regulated entity in the European Union. Okay, they provide their ICT services from the United Kingdom. They are covered by DORA because the end service is being delivered in the European Union. So they are covered it. So yes, we're not in the European Union, but DORA is going to have a significant impact on our financial sector and the ICT services which provide that. So sorry for interrupting you, Sophie, but I thought that was quite an important one to just mention on the questions.
Absolutely, Andrew. You're more than welcome to interrupt at any time. Thank you so much for the answer. We are now sort of nearly out of time, folks. So continue to pop your questions in and we'll try and get to them, possibly not on this webinar, but we'll try and get back to you individually. And like I said, we can book some time in Gary's diary if there's anything cyber comply specific. That kind of does round up everything from today. We've had some great questions. We've had some great panel. Thank you so much to everybody, Andrew, Alice and Gary, for being here today just to discuss all things DORA and ISO 27001. If you have any feedback, do pop it down for us and we'll happily review it and come back to you. But it's just left for me to say thank you so much for listening this afternoon. I do hope you have a great Wednesday evening, and we hope to see you all again on another session like this soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.